going to be doing a speedo cable replacement on an 86 Grand National. Driving speedometer would make clicking noises. It currently has the two-piece from the factory. Ordered a legit AC Delco one piece. It looks like they only come in about 100 inches long, so we're going to work through that process. I'm going to start with the dash removal to get access to the back of the gauge cluster to unhook the end of the speedo cable. I'm going to go ahead and use this little pick here. Just slightly insert it behind the gauge cluster here, and there's little clips. You just gently pull on it, work around, and once you have that broke free, you'll get access to the exterior console up here. Alright, so here's the front face of the gauge cluster that just simply popped off. I'll turn it around here. You'll see the little clips that it's being held in with. There's one. You notice that they're metal springs, and it looks like a few of them didn't make it out on this plastic piece, which it looks like, if we look up here, might have popped off inside the little pocket hole those things clip into. So we'll get some needle nose and get those out. Next part is undoing these screws to get the cluster out. Okay, so we're going to need to remove this exterior portion of the gauge cluster, which before we need to do that, you'll need to remove the vent plate that's below the steering column. It's right here. Normally goes in as such. Get some light there. So there's two 7mm bolts up underneath. You remove those and you'll be able to slide that off. And you move that out of the way. Then you continue to use the 7mm on the screws here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So you move those off. We'll pop off that exterior. Alright, with the console removed, we have access to the gauge cluster to remove it. There's 4 bolts, 2 on top, 2 on bottom, 7mm again. There's 1, 2 on that side, and then the 2 on the bottom, right there, and right there. So I'm going to go ahead and unscrew these right quick and see if I can pull this cluster out. So the gauge cluster was kind of reluctantly not wanting to come out. So I think I found the issue how to get it to come out a little bit further here. Is there wasn't enough slack for the speedometer cable. So here it is going inside of through the firewall. You follow my hand, it snakes all the way to this connection right here, what makes it a two-piece. So I freed up some slack on the speedo cable and essentially just started feeding it inside of the firewall, which broke the cluster free and was able to move it to a spot where I could see on the back side of the gauge cluster here. It looks like there's a tab. I'm going to need to press to release that end of the speedo cable from the cluster. Alright, so I gave it a little bit more slack, pushed it inside more in the firewall, and I was able to move the cluster further out to be able to get 2 hands back there. And there should be a little black tab at the top there that you push in towards the actual cluster. So you'll push it in that little tab towards you, and that should release the speedo cable. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to tie a piece of string to the end of that and then pull it through the firewall so I can use this string to pull the new one back in through the firewall. All right, got it pulled out of the firewall. It looked like the string made it out with it. Looks like the grommet did too, so I'm going to end up pulling that grommet off and putting it on the new one, as well as tying the string back to hopefully help guide it better back to the back of the gauge cluster. The next part, the other end of the transmission, what you're going to want to do is probably jack up the car, put it on jack stands, and as soon as I get under there and figure out what tools we'll need, and then I'll let you know here in a second. All right, so I kind of got to a hurdle. Basically what I had to do was disconnect the second part of the cable and undo my little trace line that I did and put it on the second part to start feeding it down back towards the transmission, is where I kind of had a problem because this bulkhead's, I don't know, or whatever you call it, this nut's kind of big. It's kind of a mess down here, kind of tight fit. So basically what I had to do, get a 10mm socket, undo this first bolt to be able to kind of maneuver this splash shield so you can get access up underneath here and kind of feel with your hands to kind of guide the speedo cable down. And once it's out of that hurdle, there's a second one I'll show you real quick here. So I get the light. Okay. Let's see. So as you can see, it's kind of over by the brake distributor. So what you're gonna have to do, originally it was trying to come straight out through here, but there's not enough wide enough gap for that threaded end to slip through, so you kind of gotta, you can see what I'm doing here, kind of move it forward towards the brake distribution block up until it pops out, and then jiggle the cable out and be able to get it this way here. It looks like my string's still attached, so that's good. And then, all right, well, we got that part out, so cool. We'll just leave it there so I know how to fish it right back up that way. Now, the other end, there's 2 more bolts that you gotta undo. I'm gonna flip this camera around here. So we got a 10mm there bracket, and then the actual connection to the transmission, another 10mm, holds a little metal piece that holds, I'm guessing, the speedo cable in the transmission. Then you just get a pair of pliers and loosen that end up, and I'll get the new one attached here. Alright, here's both the ends. I got the second part off. I saw in other videos it's probably a good idea. There's a little shield right here that I guess keeps it from getting kinked. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer that over to the new cable and start running that. Alright, here was that brace I was talking about, a transfer from the old one to the new one. I cleaned this one up a little bit, and this cable comes coiled up pretty good and it's pretty springy. So what I'm going to do is kind of just gently straighten it out just a little bit, to where it's not totally wanting to bend every which way. Okay, so I got the new cable attached to the transmission. You got it right there. Should use a pair of pliers and slowly just turn on it. You want to position that bracket in a way that it kind of steers the cable away from the undercarriage. And then you've got that other 10mm little bracket there. Lets the cable curve as it slowly feeds back to where I had started feeding it to the brake distro block. Kind of fed it the same way that we had to remove it. Also with my feeder string attached to it, hopefully that'll come in handy trying to pull it back up through to the top there to the engine bay. I just got started on that, so I'm going to go back up top side of the engine and pull on that little string and see if I can get it to fish up. Okay, so feeding that thing with the string was kind of cumbersome because I didn't take enough time to uncoil that wire. It was still kind of bendy, so I had to straighten it out a little bit more. But so under this little splash panel, you have to stick your hand up in there and feel for that hole, and then kind of guide the speedo cable up toward that hand and kind of direct it to where it kind of snakes over the top of this splash panel up above. And then you can start pulling your little pull string from this side, and let's see where my light go. Surely, and it popped its head up right there. So I'm gonna continue fishing that out all the way, get some slack, and hopefully get it start plugged it into the through the firewall. All right, I got it fished through. I did move over that firewall grommet. It's right here. I'll probably put that in last as soon as I get the gauge cluster stuff situated, but that string did come in handy. It was almost like a ventriloquist act trying to guide it both from under the dash. Under the dash, I was using my left hand to kind of pull and feed it, while I was using my right hand to kind of tug on the cable to kind of guide it and fill around in there. It probably would have been easier to actually remove the whole gauge cluster altogether, but I was able to do it with it still kind of attached to the harness and stuff. So when I get that plugged in and get everything buttoned up,